It's showtime. We are live, Littlehales, on LinkedIn, or we're not live and we're just talking to ourselves. But either way, we're going to have a hoot for the next 60 minutes. So thank you very much to everybody who might be joining today and tuning in. It's showtime. We've got 60 minutes where we're talking about how to avoid burnout in leadership roles. And I don't think that is limited to leadership roles. I think it goes across any role that any person is working in, whether or not you're managing people or you're managing yourself. Um, Anybody can suffer from a burnout. But before we get into the meat of today's session and we do some introductions between myself and Kay, what we want to do is, if you are listening and you are here, just so we can understand how many people are tuning in, where you're tuning in from, what some of your struggles are, what some of your challenges are, what we'd like you to do and what we'd invite you to do is to drop some comments into the LinkedIn comments on the LinkedIn event that you've tuned in by, and that will pop up onto our screens, and we can say hello and say thank you very much for joining. So we can share some comments as we go throughout today's session, and we want to keep this interactive. We want people to participate. We want you to share some of your stories, some of your top tips, and some of your methods for managing your own stress levels, managing your own burnout levels. But what we want to say is hello. So drop some comments into the chat below. And let's see where you're calling from, where you're coming from, or calling from. It sounds like you're on a chat show. But before we do that, and just to kick us off, obviously everybody knows me. I'm Garry Gormley of Fab Solutions, Contact Center Consultancy. And with my good friend here, Kay, who will introduce herself in a second, we are representing a new venture that we've started through High Performance Culture. And it's a series of conversations and a series of programs that we're bringing to the contact center industry and other industries to help organizations manage stress, manage burnout, manage leadership, manage trust levels within their organizations, and really helping them do something different within their leadership teams. So that's me, that's Garry. I'm going to introduce Kay, and then we're going to get into the thick of some of today's conversation. So Kay, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Morning, everybody. Thanks, Garry, for the introduction. So as Garry says, I'm Kay Littlehales, and I'm the proud owner of a company called TP Training and Coaching. Garry and I met a while ago. Garry started stalking me actually on LinkedIn a few years ago in terms of what can we do together? How can we have a conversation and make things happen? And that's happened since. I'm really, really pleased that it did. So why am I here today? So I'm joining Garry to talk about the phenomenon called the fatigue phenomenon. And what we wanted to do today is get you to join us to delve into how we can build some strategies and insights that power the high-performing teams in this hybrid world that, let's be honest, is not always easy to navigate around. And I'll hand you back to Garry. But yeah, really pleased to join you all today. Enjoy the conversation.
Brilliant. So when we were pulling this together, and I think when we started thinking about what we can do for this format, there were some real things that we wanted people to be able to do, and that was having some real, I suppose, key practical takeaways. So we're gonna go through some stuff today that's going to really help address some of the stuff that Kay's talked about there around what we call the fatigue phenomenon, and we'll explain what that is, and we'll explain some practical tips and solutions that you can go away to manage some of the symptoms and some of the challenges that are in your business at the moment that might be driving some of that burnout. And what we want to think about is how we explore, I suppose, more transformative ways of building cross-functional engagement within teams, and how we start to build trust levels within teams so that people work more effectively. We reduce those levels of conflict, and we drive results within organizations through people performing at their very best. And part of that is understanding some of the importance around self-awareness, self-care, self-empathy, and really understanding how all that impacts and helps us prevent some of the burnout that we see within organizations. So a couple of things that we want to go through today. There's about 3 things that we're going to look to cover. We'll look to cover what is the fatigue phenomenon. And that's a concept that we've built through our own research and experience with working with other brands. And there's an approach that we want to specifically talk about, which is the 3 E's. And that's how you can build more, I suppose, tips and techniques to kind of manage that fatigue phenomenon and understand what impacts our own levels of fatigue and what impacts our own levels of burnout. And we're going to address that through ways of looking at routine. We're going to look at it, how we build habits and how our habits have changed, I suppose, since COVID, and how that contributes towards that burnout level that we're seeing at the moment, especially in more remote and hybrid environments. And we're going to look at what we call managing and building strategic resilience. And for those that are watching, we've had lots of work. We've done work with the NHS, we've done work in the healthcare sector, we've done work in hospitality sectors, and a number of different industries. And we're seeing very similar things across a lot of those. And our approach as a duo, if you like, is we've got a very caring but a direct approach to these conversations. And we've done that through looking at all the different sectors that we've got within the business. And we were hoping to have a special guest today, which who comes from an industry where there is high levels of burnout, high levels of stress, and that is a chap called Scott Monroe. Sadly, he can't make the session today, but what we do want to recognise, which Scott was going to come and talk to us about, was an initiative that he's involved in called the Burnt Chef Project, which is a 23,000 globally recognised hospitality professionals who are trying to burn away the stigma that surrounds mental health worldwide in the hospitality sector. We are going to share some links to that for anybody that wants to know a little bit more, and they can connect with Scott directly and hear more about that. But first of all, before we start to go through that, I want to hand over to Kay, who's going to talk to us about some of those principles that I've just mentioned there around fatigue phenomenon, and she's going to share some slides that might help bring some of this to life. And like I said, if anybody's got any questions or any thoughts or any contributions as we go throughout today's session, drop them into the chat and we can showcase them on this platform. So Kate, over to you.
Thank you, Gary. Not sure if you have to share the slides. I'm trying to.
Oh, let me jump on for you. And here we go. Slides coming your way.
Technical. Thank you, Gary. Okay, so thanks, Gary, for the introduction. And I have to say, we've spent a whole year researching and building a program that's fit for any sector. So these statistics that we're going to share with you and the terminology that we're going to use is internal to the high-performing culture, the business that Garry and I are building. And it's about developing leadership capability. We're not your generic training provider. So we are wanting to do something different that is more relatable, that builds resonance with the leadership, that has like long-term impact. So what we've discovered from researching up to 3,000 professionals is that we've coined the phrase, the fatigue phenomenon. And what we've decided to define this is, it's a pervasive state of mental, emotional and physical exhaustion that's linked to the post-pandemic world where we are too accessible and we're feeling more cognitive dissonance. And the cognitive dissonance part comes from, because before lockdown, and dare I say those words, sorry that I'm still using them, but before lockdown, we had a bundle of habits and routine that were just unconscious habits. There were things that we did without even thinking about. And now we're at this stage now, 3 years down the line, where we're questioning, do I feel okay as a leader, but do I feel okay as a human in myself with my overall well-being? And we've got some great research that backs up all of this information. So some insight that I want to share with you is that some of our clients that have helped us build this research, and I've got them written down here, are the healthcare sector, contact centre, digital and tech, apprenticeship providers, and 28% of most leaders within all of those sectors owned up to having no breaks. 75% of people attending our workshops or coaching have owned up to being far too accessible. And that accessibility is defined as WhatsApp, Teams, Zoom, phone calls, Messenger. And so there's a definite shift in, we are too accessible with less boundaries. Okay, so I'm just going to talk you through this model that is on the screen here. And some of you may know this as something that's a little bit different. But before I do that, I just want you to think about something. So we're in a place where leaders are neglecting self-care out of work. So when Garry set up a poll for this, over a week ago, there was some great comments, and one of them was talking about, well, what's happening about outside of work? Because that is actually, there's a grey area now, isn't there, where we are clearly less boundary orientated in a place of post-lockdown. So inadvertently, everything that's happening in work is contributing to what's happening outside of work, and we're less intrinsically motivated and connected than ever before. So what we're going to show you now is this trauma triangle that we speak to leaders with, and also our coaching clients. And what we were saying is, if you imagine yourself February 2020, and I said to you, what was your routine like in the morning? How many steps were you doing? What did your day look like? The majority of leaders that we've spoken to have said, okay, I'd get up at 6 a.m. I'd have my shower, I'd have my coffee, I'd walk to work, I'd get in the car. There's already 40 actions taken place before even getting the key in the car door. And then we worked it out that on average, we are doing 200,000 less steps per month as human beings. We're more socially disconnected. We've got an average of 32% taking breaks amongst us. We're more task orientated. We're less creative and inspired. And we've got a cost of living isolation taking place on top of that. So the routine before lockdown was more intrinsic and more socially connected. And this model is talking about the routine that we have that's unconscious habits. The rituals were water cooler conversations with your colleagues and feedback that took place to reward the effort that you were making in person, so you felt more validated. And if we think about March 2020, 8.6 billion people's lives changed dramatically, where we were put into a place of negative change, some people trauma. And right now, 2020, December the 13th, there's not many leaders that are saying, when they're having very transparent conversations, I now have a defined routine like I had in February 2020. And with all of that in mind, I'd like to welcome a conversation actually in the chat, if anybody would like to contribute, and be really honest and open. Do you feel that you've got a better routine now that's better for your well-being, or a worse routine? If you'd like to add anything in the chat, please.
You know what? I think, I mean, it's a really interesting point, that, isn't it, Kay? And I think it, for me, it's defined by what do you really understand what good well-being looks like? And did you have a really good well-being plan before lockdown or after? I think when I look at it from my own perspective, and I don't know if anybody on the webinar today who's might be listening has got any thoughts. If you do, drop it into the comments. But I think when I look at it from my own perspective, the boundaries that you were talking about there, and how kind of where does 9 a.m. start, where does 5 p.m. finish, and where do you stop and where do you start? For me, those lines have just become massively blurred. And I think as a business owner, it was always blurred, but I think as a business owner in a post-COVID environment, that blurring and that kind of that boundary has got even further and further. So you end up finding yourself working till 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. You might work through your weekends to catch up. And I think certainly from the people that I've spoken to in leadership roles, that 9 to 5 doesn't exist anymore. 8 till 6, 8 till 7, 8 till 8 is now probably more of the norm, because people feel the benefit of not having to commute, but they also then feel the guilt of not putting in the hours. So I think there is something in there around feeling guilty about not doing enough or being too accessible. I think it is the key part for me. But yeah, I think you've spoken to just as many people as I've spoken to, and there's probably some very similar themes coming through.
I think the thing that I've got written down here from some of the workshops that you and I have run, Garry, is fast forward to now. This is from a really senior leader in a company I won't name. Fast forward to now, there's no such thing as out of work for me. And they actually pledged at the end of a 2-day workshop that Garry and I ran, okay, what I am now going to do is I'm going to reset my boundaries with my team. because my behaviour is demonstrating to them that should be their behaviour. Subliminally, I'm telling them, because I'm not having a break, that you're not going to have a break. The biggest bit of feedback, interestingly, from a lot of people is that we communicate on WhatsApp as well, and that turns into 6 or 7 o'clock WhatsApps when people are having lunch or dinner with the family. I mean, it's tea if you're from the north, Garry, but we'll call it dinner. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting conversation. And the other bit of feedback from using this model and getting people to it's a reflective model. It's getting people to think about, what routine did I have that I really liked and I miss? But what rituals did I have, such as the light bulb moments from speaking to colleagues informally, getting feedback immediately, not always, not feedback to critique, but feedback that went really well. In-person congratulations and praising effort was the biggest thing about, do we praise effort enough because we're at task? So that's come up in quite a lot of our workshops, Garry, don't you think?
And one of the key things, even 3 years on, is that organizations still haven't got a clearly defined way of working for remote and hybrid workers. So people then don't know what those boundaries are, and they don't allow themselves enough time to kind of have that breather. And I think the key bit that I see in a lot of organizations is, because it's Zoom or because it's Teams, I don't need that whole transitioning from one end of the office to the other end of the office. So people get quite comfortable sticking back to back meetings in. So when we talk about this whole idea of routine, it's that recalibration of what that routine needs to be now that we're in an entirely different environment, and understanding what that routine needs to work for cross-functionally, so that everybody's on the same page and we're not allowing people to schedule back-to-back meetings, and that we don't allow that individually. So we set our own personal barriers.
Yeah. We've got to be kind to ourselves, and as leaders, if we've got the burnout, then our team are probably going to have it as well, because everything that we act out, people tend to see that as a role model.
Yeah, and I think when we look at the fatigue phenomenon, Kay, and some of the outcomes that that lack of routine and those lack of rituals and that lack of self-care happens, what are you seeing that's the main kind of driver in terms of the impacts on us in business?
Yeah, so I've put something on here, actually, bear with me. So these are the outcomes. These are the top 6 outcomes that is manifesting in different forms. So 80 to 90% of people that are attending workshops or having coaching conversations are saying that they feel that their cognitive functionality is definitely diminishing. And so I probed a little bit with a coaching client the other day, and this client is very high up, very responsible, and not in burnout, because they're in a preventative way. They're in a preventative, intelligent way of working. But they said that it gets to 8 o'clock at night, and if anybody asks them a question that is really simple and straightforward, they just have not got the inclination to answer it. And what they're saying is, in a morning, unless they really set up their day through conscious things such as a walk, doing something that's fun before they even turn the laptop on, and reduce productivity, which you could, I mean, that's very generic, but some of the examples there are, I can't think straight because in my diary and in my team's diary, through nobody's fault, I've got this written down, we're back to back as a team. I have to do something about this. And I don't know if Emma Sinclair's listening, but Emma Sinclair, I used to work with Emma at Virgin. When I worked at Virgin Media Business, what a great lady she is. She's now in a very senior position. I think it's a director role. And what she does every Monday, and I think some Wednesdays, Garry, is she has an informal catch-up. They call it the coffee catch-up, where they do not speak about work. And they start the day that way. So intrinsically, people are feeling more socially connected. Yeah. The other thing that's been on the rise, and menopause is linked to this as well, with fatigue, which is a double whammy if you're female. It's not great, is increased errors, but also brain fog, increased brain fog and errors, because people then are feeling that they're having to work longer hours, as you've suggested, Garry. And we've sometimes as well, it's suggested in 70 to 85% of surveys here, leaders are saying, and the workforce, we feel like something's missing, but we're not sure what it is. We can't explain what it is, but something's missing.
Yeah.
And there's a decline in overall well-being. So the Gallup statistics that I looked at this morning are saying 57% of people are saying that they feel well. But then when I delve into it a little bit further, that question's a little bit generic. What it's really saying is, do you like working from home? Because we've all picked up some pretty bad habits. And the other key one was less motivated towards our more intrinsic nature. So a lot of our clients are suggesting that they've forgotten about their, one of them used to go canoeing, one of them used to go whitewater, so cold water dipping, and one of them stopped studying. So they're saying that some of the hobbies have gone to the wayside because they're just absolutely knackered on a weekend, Garry.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what, as well, I think that there might also be something in there around, because I know certainly in the industry I work in a lot in the contact center space, there are more conversations around development, around your personal growth, when you're in the office, and when you're working with other people and you see what they're doing and you see how they're kind of investing in themselves. So again, I think that kind of that distance doesn't help breed some of that that personal development, that personal growth, and that personal motivation. And I think we're going to move on to some of the ways that we can start to combat that. But before I do that, I think there's a really great comment in the chat from Martin Teasdale. Hey Martin, thanks for watching.
Hi Martin.
And he's essentially saying there that a leader should look at the output. And I think that's a really great point, to say sometimes we expect the number of hours that we do is the output rather than actually the quality of work. If the output is there are happy days where, and Martin's talking about how he's worked for leaders where there's presenteeism, and there's an expectation of, where are you? Why weren't you logged in at that time? Why weren't you accessible? And you can see here that the culture and the atmosphere that creates is people are sending WhatsApps at people at 9 o'clock or at the weekend. So we've got that I suppose that lack of trust, perhaps, that people are doing the job that they should be doing, and they're doing the activities that they should be doing in the time frame that we're doing them. And I certainly think from when we were pre-COVID, if you were asking somebody in the contact center, can I work from home? The answer to that was always no, because it's not a business requirement. There's no business requirement for it. Suddenly you throw COVID into the mix and there is a massive business requirement for it. And I don't know if we've bridged that trust divide that makes people feel psychologically unsafe, which I think is a challenge that we face in a lot of industries and in a lot of leadership roles. So I think there's a few ways that we can tackle that, and I love the model that you've built within the 3 E's, Kate, because I think it helps you take a really pragmatic view of how to manage and develop some of those strategies. So do you want to talk us through what this means and how people maybe listening can employ these in a 4th E, employ these into their teams?
Yeah, like that. We've got a 4th E now. You had to add one on, didn't you? Thanks for that, Garry. More work for me.
It's my contribution for the day.
Thank you. I want to challenge back a bit there. So I don't know if it is lack of trust. I think as human beings and as leaders, we feel that we've got a responsibility. And I think sometimes, I don't know how to phrase this, but there's it's not fear, but there's guilt association attached to working from home from most leaders we speak to, Garry. So I don't know if it is trust. I think it's that we don't feel like we've done enough because we've worked from home. We may have put the washing on during the day. We may have done things during the day that we wouldn't do in the office. But let's be honest, when I worked in the office, when I was running a training department, I on average, I'd spend an hour and a half a day having informal conversations that were having an impact. But there was no guilt associated, because when I left the door of the office, I'd walk home and get my steps in and feel invigorated when I got back, and I was switched off. But now we have to get more disciplined, me included, of where do we stop? Where do we say, I'm not available from this time? Somebody that I know that may be listening now puts an out of office on from 6:30 in an evening.
Yeah. You know what? I've worked on this in the past, and I've been fortunate enough to go on like corporate retreats where we go and we kind of say, right, actually, how do you manage your stress? And we talked about the positive aspect of stress, the eustress that goes with it, and how we kind of say, right, how do we try and maintain that state? And the way that we maintain that state is we talked about it in the retreat that I was on, is about what are your red lines? What are the things that actually you won't flex, you won't bend on? And how does that, how do you then communicate that out to the people in and around your workspace that might be trying to push the boundaries on your red lines? So I think when we look at, again, the new way of working, and is it a new way of working? Because it's been going for the last 3 years. The new definition of working is that you are now online. I can see your green dot, and if that green dot is flashing in Teams, I know that I can talk to you, and I know that I can be accessible to you. I don't think we do enough of that red line drawing and saying, right, between these hours and these hours, I'm not available, and between these hours and these hours, I need to think about stuff that is on my plate. And we don't give ourselves enough thinking time for things. And I think what we're guilty of is we go back to back to back to back to back meetings, and what we do is we pick up action after action after action after action after action from all of those meetings, and then we don't actually plan time in for the doing. So we just get those shoulders loaded on, and then feel guilty because we're not completing it all. And then what we end up doing is we feel like our performance is in question because we're not getting around to everything, or we're not finishing everything, or we're not doing it to the standard that we do it. And that just adds all of that additional personal pressure and all that additional personal stress onto what is already a massively stressful situation. So I think the 3 pillars that you've got on here, I think, start to help people, I suppose, shake off some of that guilt. And I love what you've referred to it there, is that kind of guilt association, because it can feel incredibly guilty for both yourself and for your team and within the wider business. So that it starts with that self-care piece and how you start to, I suppose, be a little bit more honest with yourself. So the 3 E's as a preventative strategy, how would you summarize them to start with?
Yeah, okay. So you've alluded to something here. So we talk about we're changing the way we work, and I disagree. Not with you, I disagree with us as a whole, because we've got this whole language that needs to change. So we're changing the way that we think, not how we work. We can only change the way that we work once we change the way that we think. And so it's a 3-step process, and it's a toolkit for leaders to use. And I've suggested, and Garry suggested, that we do this on a Sunday evening. And so it's not classed as work because it's going to free you up. So the idea is that there is evaluate, engage, and empathy. Evaluate is you begin your day without a task. You assess your workload and incorporate breaks. You change your state. And what I mean by that is you change your state of mind by, when you've got a 10-minute break at 4 o'clock, you play music, you go for a walk, you do something totally different other than work, and you leave your laptop. And Garry and I ran a workshop with the they won't mind saying name, GTD Healthcare, where we had this amazing space, and one of the workshop was leave your phones. One of the exercises, was leave your phones, go away, and tell us how you are going to incorporate more intrinsic conversations. And they came back and they said, wow, 20 minutes outdoors, game changer. Yeah. And we challenged some real senior leaders, said, why aren't you doing that? So evaluate is that. It's that description of, it's knowing that you need to take control of your diary before your week starts. But the first thing that you do on a daily basis is not task orientated. And some leaders might say that's not possible. It is. It's possible for all of us because we're trying it and testing it at the moment. So that's
I think there's an extra bit to add on there as part of that evaluation, Kay. I think it doesn't begin with E, so you're going to shoot me for throwing up the acronym. But I think it's assess the current reality and face off to the brutal truth of what the current reality is. If there isn't enough capacity in the team to be able to take breaks, which is what we've seen from another poll that we did, is over 75% of people were saying that they don't feel like they've got the capacity or the time to be able to take breaks. I think that draws a bigger and a wider question, is to say, right, where are we with bandwidth within the team? Where are we within capacity with the team? Where are we with capability and competencies of those people that are in the team, and the responsibilities of the senior leadership team to face off to some of those, and really face off to the brutal truth that kind of sits within organizations where they feel like they can just add to the workload. So I think there's an assessment of capacity, an assessment of capability, and then evaluating where you are against that. I think is a really key point, is to say, right, actually, are we creating an environment where people can focus on well-being? Because we hear it a lot, don't we? We hear it in everybody's objectives. We hear them talking about, oh, we want to create a really great atmosphere. We want to create a really great environment. We want everybody to be really focused on the well-being. But those same organizations aren't doing that evaluation piece.
Tick box. You know, Kirsty Birch, I don't know if you follow her on LinkedIn, she's great. I know we're speaking to her at the moment, Garry. She's really passionate about the action orientation of what well-being is, because we've got tick box exercises and operational excellence that says this, we have to do this. But what you've just said links to the engage part of this model. And what I've written down here is cross-functional collaborating. So what we're trying to entice other leaders to do is, you don't have to speak to just people in your organization. Okay, parallel peer-to-peer leaders from other organizations are helping each other at the moment. One, it's perfectly okay to have an offload in a really safe environment with somebody. Mentors and coaches, leaders that have coaches are feeling better. And then there's the intentional and informal meetings that are linked to engage. So going back to your point, Garry, if we're really bad at planning, and I don't mean it condescending, but I think everybody's pretty poor at planning at the moment, when we've just got task in our diaries. It's up to us to change that. So intentional informal meetings will make the formal meetings more worthwhile. And the other thing that I want to mention is the radical candor feedback. So the actual model and the theory of radical candor needs to be used now more than ever. We speak about coaching. I absolutely love coaching. I am a coach, but we can't coach unless we can use feedback. And feedback is not telling someone when they're doing something wrong. Feedback is, brilliant, you did so much better doing that than you did do yesterday or last week. Carry on doing that. What else can you do more of? And so blending it, but also being, radical candor is being caring, coming from a caring place, but being direct in an assertive way, not an aggressive way. And I think engaging, we've got to get better at giving feedback. And so it's not just during a one-to-one, it's not just end of year, because then when people are working hybrid and all of a sudden they get this performance review that's not what they expected, that's up to us as leaders to give everybody the feedback that's fair and square. So engaging is breaking from just your task, networking more, asking for feedback, and doing it, connecting with nature. So connect with others and self, and connect with nature. And there's so much facts, there's so many facts around nature and how good it is for us. And some people roll their eyes at it until they start doing it. Yeah. And Becky Irvine, who's a good friend of Garry and I, and we do work with Becky, she's very consistent, and she's taken herself into a voluntary place of discomfort where she goes into cold water, and she's really battled with the things that have given her good habits recently, and it's changed her life. And she's helping other people change their life, and she's a senior leader. So she's engaging in this way because she's evaluated it. And the last point, Garry, and feel free to add to this, and anybody else, thank you for your comments, Martin, we really appreciate it, is empathy. This is referring to empathy for self.
Can I jump in before we jump into empathy, okay? Because I think the stuff that you've talked about there on engage is actually there's some really interesting points that you make there. And I was in a session at the Shared Services UK forum where we were talking about how to build omni-channel customer-centric strategies. And one of the things we talked about was actually think about people first before you start to think about the technology. And we talked about how you can start to create more access to nature, and one of the things we talked about was really simple, was just going out for a walk in one-to-one. And I think we get hung up on this Teams culture where everything has to be on a Teams call, everything has to be formal, and actually we've forgotten that mobile phones are indeed mobile. So you can do whatever you like. And I think that small step sometimes is, I mean, it's amazing how many people's eyebrows raised when they're like, have you ever actually gone out on the phone with your team on a one-to-one, just going around, walking around, and just getting through? But that's forcing each person outside. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again because I think it's important here. Some of the most afflicted is probably the wrong words, but I think the demographic that's most impacted by this burnout problem is probably the generation Z or generation Alpha. So you're 20 plus people who are probably working from home. They're probably in their bedroom. They're probably not leaving the bedroom, because when they then switch off, they probably get onto a game station or something, and they're probably not seeing much light out of hours. So I think that whole
thing, got children, Garry.
Yeah, I mean, I might be making a massive generalization there, but certainly in the industry and the feedback that I see, and I think people like Katie Forsyth from Red Recruitment will back me up on this, is that generational gap is and that access to nature and access to things outside of the home is becoming more and more of a challenge, because we've got all these remote technologies, because we've got all these things that route us to a home. We don't then take ourselves outside. So I think that piece that you talked about there about intentional and informal meetings, both in and outside of the office, is really, really important. I think it makes a massive, massive difference.
You know, I'm going to be blunt, and I might get thrown off LinkedIn for this, Garry. You can tell me off after, but the higher education system pisses me off, because I spend a lot of time, and I've been working within education for years, as you know, Garry, and I spent some time at a couple of unis recently, and 100% of the guys said, we really struggle to go outside into nature. We really struggle to meet friends anymore. We talk ourselves out of meeting friends, and when we see them, we love it. That goes for us as well. It goes for every age group. But I think there's a really good point here that Megan's raised. I don't know if you can highlight it, Garry, and thanks, Rachel, as well. Megan's point, wow, absolutely spot on. You make an active choice to enable and disable apps. I do the same. I don't have any apps on my phone until I just want to use LinkedIn. I don't know if you want to use the chat function, Megan, or if anybody else wants to join in, but do you find yourself do you find that when you take your apps, you still go to your phone out of habit because you still want to use them? I don't know if anybody wants to join in with that, or if you want to, Garry.
I probably do. I literally, it's one of those things when you forget your phone, you feel like there's an extent of your arm that's been cut off. And I'm a little bit like Megan, is I'll disable some. I won't disable all, but it's probably the ones that I don't disable that give me the most traffic. That are the ones that I probably should be disabling. So I think there's a really good point with that. But I think, again, this goes back to a cultural thing within an organization to say, right, if you're switching off apps and your teams will ping all day long, you've set up all of these WhatsApp groups to stay connected, you've got loads of emails, you've got that red light flashing if you're still using a BlackBerry. Who's using a BlackBerry these days? I don't know. Shows my age. But we've got all of these things, and actually there is an expectation sometimes that we are accessible, and that if I've sent you an email, I need you to respond. If I've sent you a Teams meeting, I need you to respond. I need you to be on it, because of the nature of that type of communication. It's instant, so we're expecting more instant responses. And I think we've just got to recalibrate and educate people that because it's instant, and because you've sent it and you're sat there waiting for a response, and you're waiting for that little kind of WhatsApp thing Garry is typing, you're waiting for that back and you're not getting it, it can be quite agitating on both sides of the coin. So I think we've got to be mindful of the environment that we're creating off the back of all of these different types of apps and communications, because that adds to the stress and that adds to the burnout.
What about this as well, Garry? And anyone feel free to join in. Megan, thanks for responding. I'm the same. I definitely still use my phone. Just not for work. Yeah, exactly. So I read an article about somewhere in West Yorkshire. It'll be near Hebden. I think it's Todmorden, where there's a cafe, there's a workspace. And in this workspace, it's great. I mean, there's all kinds of people that go in, and they've got this, they have half an hour where they'll have music on and different things happening, and then they'll go out for group walks, all from different companies. I mean, the countries, the top 5 countries that I've read about that are the healthiest, it's always Scandinavia, isn't it? Yeah. It's always Scandinavia that is up there, because they do this, they do the evaluating. So I've got a couple of Scandi mates that the diary's set up so they've got breaks in there. They've got fika breaks in there, they call it. They've also got this way of engaging where they'll go on bike rides, they will have informal conversations where they don't allow phones in certain spaces of the office. They've got sleeping pods, and the empathy for self, they don't really need, because it's built into their culture. So this is a cultural thing. And I think it's far deeper than what we think it is. And unless an organisation hasn't just got a strategy that says we are doing this for well-being, but starts to action and do some things, it's going to be the same, because we're just going to continue to speak about it. So I think there's some work for us all to do, Garry. Where do we start with it?
You know what? I think it sounds bizarre, but we have to encourage people to be more selfish. Yeah. And what I mean by that is we have to encourage people to think more about themselves before they start to think about others sometimes, because I think, especially in as team leaders, we think our team are generally the most important thing to us. But actually, if we're not doing particularly well, and if we're not looking after ourselves, and if we're not making sure that we're taking breaks, and if we're not making sure that we're not kind of looking after our own personal development and making time, then actually we can't best serve the people that we're supposed to be leading. And actually what they do is they take that as a signal that that's how I should behave and that's what I should be doing. And I posted a poll on LinkedIn the other day, say, do people feel guilty for taking breaks or for leaving on time? And there was an awful lot of people, I think it was about 60% of people that are saying they either did or have fairly recently felt guilty for either not taking a break or not feeling like they've got time to actually leave on time, because the projection of a leader kind of staying there and kind of doing everything and being that person that stays on time and stays late every time is something that then people feel like they need to either aspire to, or they feel guilty, to your point earlier, again, that kind of guilt association, because they're still there. I need to still be there because they're emailing me. I need to respond. So I think there's a lot of barriers that we need to break. But I think if we encourage people to be more empathetically selfish, I think is the phrase I'm going to coin, then I think people will, the whole shift will start to happen, and people will spend more time doing the things that are actually benefiting for the well-being. So they'll go to the gym, they'll get up earlier to go to the gym, they'll feel like they can get up early and go to the gym because they don't need to be at the desk at 7:30, 8 o'clock. They can actually be in a gym class at 7:30, 8 o'clock, and
you've been doing it, Garry. You've been doing all of these things. You have been doing it.
I've been trying, but it's hard. It's hard, and it's easy for us to say because we're not managing a 200, 300, 400, 500 seat contact center or organization that's going to do something. But I think it takes a strategic perspective to drive that change. So it needs to come from the top, which I think what often we think about is that, well, the frontline agents or the people that are at the coalface are the people that need to make a decision about the break or need to make a decision about whether or not they're going to actually know. It needs to be driven from the top down.
And that leads me on to so we've spoken about the actionable aspects and the predictable things that we all know at the moment. And what I'm seeing more of, and I'm really pleased, is that businesses now are merging holistic and interpersonal solutions together. So obviously you and I have been in the leadership remit for years, and I've been delivering leadership and coaching initiatives for a long time now, but I've got a keen interest in holistic stuff, and I have done for a long time because I'm old and I'm a little bit of a corporate hippie. But the thing that I'm really proud of with the organisations that you and I've worked with, Garry, is that especially the NHS, 90% of them said that they would consider holistic approaches such as breath works, cold water therapy, CBT and coaching, and GTT Healthcare, who we work with, have all got coaches and openly admitted that they don't always use them, but they should do. And cold water therapy and breath works, there's more leaders now using it. And there's a couple of people that I follow on Instagram, and there's a couple of people that I think, you know what, you're getting into the corporate environment now and you're making a difference. And I mean, I can't stand the word influencer. I hate it. It's like people that are deemed as influencers now make millions from dancing on TikTok. Great. I'm happy for you, but that's not positive influence that we need. Wim Hof talks about things that help people change their life. And so do other people that we see on here. So I just, I invite anybody to discuss this as well. Does anybody that's watching Garry and myself do anything that's holistic or considered doing it in the past or recently?
While we wait first, you're going on to a topic that I'm talking about now. So while we wait for some of those responses, and you describe yourself as a corporate hippie. I probably describe myself as corporate. Just drop the hippie. So when we talk about things like breathworks and cold water therapy, I am probably one of the ones that would be maybe skeptical and maybe describe them as a little bit woo-woo. So what would you say to someone like me who is maybe representative of some of the people in corporate land about how much of an impact these can have on their leadership team and how it can help influence their leadership team's thinking and how it can maybe cascade it down to some of the other layers of leadership management and the organization?
I'm going to start off with coaching, Garry. So,
well, obviously, I'm a big fan of coaching. I don't consider that woo-woo, but things like breath work and cold water therapy, I'm like, is that really? Is there something really around that that's going to help kind of really improve my mental state?
So I'm going to ask you a question then. What is it that you do now to help your mental state?
Not enough is probably the right answer to that, and I think we've all been guilty with that. But whenever I'm feeling stressed, anxious, or like I'm losing control, and that's the bit that I think a lot of people can resonate with is the loss of control. I have to anchor back to I am the person that can influence that control, and a lot of me, it's about writing things down and building a plan. I'm not a journaler. I don't journal. But I like to get all of the thoughts and all of the things that I can influence and all the things that I can control down onto paper and saying, right, actually, once I've gotten it written down and once I can see a bit of a clearer path, I'm usually in a much more healthier, mindful space.
So what if that doesn't work? What else would you do? Because I know what you do.
I talk to people. Problem shared is a problem halved.
Yeah, okay. So sometimes that's not enough. And for the introverts, I've got a lot of friends that are introverts and ambiverts, and I'm an ambivert, believe it or not. I know, scary or what. But so let's take an introvert that's got a really stressful job and they have to be in the office and they're at task and so on. And so the extroverts, and they start the day at 8 a.m. Sometimes they're finishing at 6:30, and they just can't think straight. One person who I won't name that may be listening now started doing breath works and cold water therapy. They did it separately. They did breath works and they went into a forest in East Lancs and it was raining and there was 20 people sat around this fire and they had this plastic sheet on them and they did this breath works for 2 hours. They then got on a train back to Manchester and they said that they slept for 10 hours solid. Okay. Wow. They did say these words because they were more skeptical than you, Garry, honestly. They said, I was sat around this campfire with this plastic sheet on me in this East Lancs forest thinking, what the hell am I doing? If anybody could see me now. So I'm going to use those words. If anybody could see me now is normally why we don't do it. Because we've been deeply conditioned to think that the gym is just enough. And it's great, but a lot of people fall off the wagon. A lot of people turn to alcohol. They do. A lot of my friends do. And I have in the past.
I think we've all been guilty of that, maybe. More often than not.
I'm trying to be subtle and you're pointing yourself out here. The thing is, a lot of people do turn to alcohol, and it's breathworks activates your diaphragm. It takes you into a totally different state. It sorts out your central nervous system in a way that you feel like a different person. You feel like you're 21 years old. So again, that's down to just giving it a go and seeing how it works. It's guaranteed to work for everybody, but not everybody's prepared to try it because we've been conditioned to do different things than this. And so I know I always say it's not up to me to convince someone, but I'll certainly try and get someone to just try it.
Yeah, and you know what? I've spoken to organisations that run these like a breathworks session on people's lunch and learns and things like that, and really getting people to try and identify with holistic methods of managing their own state. And I think the overriding piece that comes from this is, and I think we alluded to this at the start, is a bit of that empathy piece, self-empathy. But I think it's also about being self-aware of when you're reaching that point of I suppose rock bottom. And I think there was a really great comment in the chat that's not appeared on the StreamYard feed, but it was from Reza Hafsiju. I hope I've said that name right. And he was saying, he said, burnout sucks. Sometimes you've just got to unplug and chill. The sooner you do that, the better. Don't wait until you hit rock bottom, and act early and take care of yourself. And I think that's a really key point, is realize the triggers and realize the things that are, be self-aware about what's impacting your own state. I think sometimes we see resilience as being able to take lots of knocks and being able to bounce back. Resilience for me is about kind of being self-aware of when you are likely to burn out, when you're likely to reach a point where it's not going to be healthy for you, when it's likely to impact your own personal well-being, but realizing that earlier as a trigger, say that is something that, and sometimes we can take this the wrong way, say that's a trigger for me, but that is a trigger of, if I carry on down that road, it's going to impact my mental well-being, it's going to impact my physical well-being, and realizing that early, I think. And I think a lot of people in business now see ways of managing burnout by having relaxation rooms, calming rooms. I think the whole mental health first aid agenda is stronger, but again, I think sometimes that can be seen as a bit of a tick box, and that we don't create the infrastructure to be able to recognize when a conversation like that requires a mental health first aider's input. We just have mental health first aiders dotted around a business. How do we create that access point, and how do we help leaders realize the triggers for their people and for themselves at the same time? And I think that all falls into this whole strategy here of evaluate, engage, and empathize, is to say, right, if we're creating those structures, don't just create the roles, create the channels, create the inlets, create the outlets for people to be able to have those conversations and feel comfortable with those conversations without fear of judgment, without fear of reprisal, because that builds that psychological safe environment that we've been talking about, which impacts people's levels of resilience and impacts people's propensity to face burnout.
I think we just wise words, Garry. I think we actually, I've got the phrase, haven't I? Positive vulnerability. I think we've really got to think about positive vulnerability as in it's our habits and it's our behaviors. And if as leaders we're not using a coaching language, and if we're not coaching, then we're not leading. It's that simple nowadays. We need to do it more than ever. But I just want to read Sam's point here. Thank you, Sam. I'm just going to read this. It's hard to consider holistic approaches when there's so much confusion. Oh, I love this. I'm going to give this a 10 out of 10. I can tell. Marketing and sales pitching surrounding the majority of effective ideas such as breathwork and cold therapy. We need to be better at informing our teams of what works and what is accessible with little to no cost, whilst also avoiding employees perceiving this as an attempt to divert away from areas where we might need to deal with the company. IMO. Yeah, I love that. And I think as well, Sam, please feel free to add to it, Sam, or anybody else. I think there's a lot of experts that aren't experts, and there's a lot of noise with explicit information of, if you do this, if you don't do this. And social media is that place. It's a dangerous place because there's so much noise, and unfortunately people are making money from that nowadays. So it's not so realistic after all, is it? So I think, as you say, there's a fine line about informing people, but I think also, Sam, I challenge that as well in terms of getting somebody in to showing people. One of the workshops that Garry and I do, we're going to invite a breathworks practitioner in who's really good, actually very good, to show people. In the public speaking workshop that we run, we do breathing exercises for people to feel calmer before they present, and it gets really good feedback. So really,
I think organisationally, I do like Sam's point, and I think he makes a good one, and I think we should look at all of the options. But I think what an undertone of what Sam's saying there is I think, and Sam, feel free to comment if you disagree with what I'm saying here, is that actually we need to be better at fixing the basics, and creating a real clear agenda for employees to have good conversations with managers. So those one-to-one conversations need to happen little and often, and they don't necessarily need to be, as we've said in here, in those real formal sessions, but actually we need to be intentionally informal in some of those conversations. So having those little and often conversations, having them in the office, having them out of the office, having them in environments that are comfortable for people, I think is the key point. And then I think we need to look at what is driving some of the burnout. Is it processes? Is it people? Is it technology? And fix some of those things as part of a very intentional program of work. And I think the work that we talk about here, and obviously the programs that we support leaders with, is around improving leadership capability and helping leaders have better conversations, and at the same time challenging some of their own processes, some of their own ways of working that I think are driving some of that burnout conversation and some of the symptoms and some of the outputs of some of that burnout. And I know Danny Wareham would definitely have a few conversations or a few thoughts on culture and leadership capability in organizations. And what is he saying here? He's saying he agrees with Sam, as I think we all do, and saying many pass off opinions as fact, often when it's based on our own life experience and not in any objective evidence or study. And I think that's why some of the stuff that we've talked about today is important, Kate, because some of it's based in some of the research that we've done, some of the conversations that we've had with clients, and a lot of it is very similar conversations in different organizations. So I think Danny's point is really, really valid in that you can't just take things at face value anymore. We're coming to the top of the hour, Kate. So how do you want to end on this? What would you say are some of your top tips to wrap up for the session?
I think Danny's point at the end there just summarises it nicely, because these outcomes here, I don't know if Danny was here for this, but these are the majority of the outcomes that leaders are saying that they feel this way. This is the experience that they're currently having. And I think the question for all of us, Garry and I included, is what can we do more of for ourselves and others that enables them to realise that they're not the only ones, and that there are, there's opportunities out there to make things easier. I suppose the ongoing question, and maybe for our next session, I'd love to have Danny on, actually, if Danny's ever free, is, how do we go about this? What is happening out there already? Because we're doing our stuff, but to hear what somebody else is doing would be amazing. But I think today it was the first of these conversations, Garry. It's just getting things started, isn't it? And addressing that there is an issue and it needs resolving. But I've really enjoyed speaking with you, Garry, and also the great comments. Thank you.
There's been some fasting. There's been some fantastic comments in the chat, and I think I appreciate everybody who takes the time out to join such a conversation. The fact that you're taking time out to join a conversation which is talking about the fact that we've not got enough time and we're all burnt out is the first step, I suppose, towards tackling that burnout conversation and starting to give people some tips. If people want to connect with us in different ways, obviously people know who I am. You've connected on LinkedIn, so hopefully we'll be connected already, but if you're not, connect with me, connect with Kay, reach out, let's have a conversation. Let's take this offline just as much as we enjoy having the conversation online in forums like this. We can talk for days about all this type of stuff, so we'd be more than happy to help people try and tackle some of that and share some of the slides and some of the content and some of the research that we've done. So please feel free to connect and say hello. Kate, any final comments from yourself?
No, it's been wonderful. Happy Christmas, everybody, and see you soon.
Happy Christmas, everybody, and have a great new year, and we'll see you all in 2024, I am sure. Kate, we'll stay on, but take care, everybody. Thanks very much, and we'll see you all again.
Bye.